I stood in my parents' driveway at 3 in the morning, staring at a brand new BMW Series 7 worth more than $500,000. My sister Amanda slept peacefully inside the house, while my parents frantically called my phone. 6 months ago, they called my tech startup idea too risky and refused my $50,000 loan request. Tonight, I discovered they secretly took out a $678,000 loan to fund Amanda's luxury car dealership dream and her expensive lifestyle. Now they expected me to mortgage my home to save them from bankruptcy. The metallic paint gleamed under the streetlights, and I could smell that new car scent even through the closed windows. This wasn't just any BMW. This was the top-of-the-line model with every upgrade imaginable. Custom leather seats, premium sound system, and technology features that cost more than most people's annual salary. My name is William, and I'm 28 years old. I've been building software applications since I was 15, and I've always dreamed of creating something that would change how businesses operate. 6 months earlier, I had walked into my parents' living room with a comprehensive business plan, financial projections, and letters of intent from potential clients. I needed $50,000 to properly launch my software development company. That night changed everything between us. Now standing here in the cold morning air, I realized just how little my dreams had meant to them compared to Amanda's whims. The phone buzzed again in my pocket, but I didn't answer. I had finally seen the truth about my family's priorities, and nothing would ever be the same. The memory of that rejection still burned in my chest like acid. 6 months ago, I had spent 3 weeks preparing the most detailed business presentation of my life. I printed charts, created prototypes, and even secured preliminary agreements with 2 small businesses who wanted to beta test my inventory management software. The dining room smelled like my mother's pot roast that Sunday evening when I spread my materials across the mahogany table. My father Robert sat at the head, his banker's expression already skeptical before I said a word. Mom Patricia arranged herself beside him with her real estate agent smile that never quite reached her eyes. Amanda lounged in the corner, scrolling through her phone and occasionally sighing dramatically. "Technology is unstable, son," Dad said, before I finished explaining the market opportunity. His voice carried that patronizing tone he used when discussing anything he didn't understand. "These computer things come and go. Remember the dot-com crash? People lost everything chasing digital fantasies." I had anticipated this objection. I pulled out industry reports showing steady growth in business software solutions, statistics about small business digitization, and testimonials from companies already using similar systems. But Dad waved his hand, dismissively, the same gesture he used to shoo away persistent salespeople. "William, you need to find a real job." Mom interjected, her manicured fingers straightening imaginary wrinkles in the tablecloth. "Something stable, something people understand. Real estate, banking, insurance. These are practical investments that help real people solve real problems." The irony of her words would haunt me later. Real problems indeed. "But this does solve real problems," I insisted, my voice cracking slightly. "Small businesses waste thousands of hours every year on inefficient inventory tracking. My software automates the entire process, saves them money, and prevents costly mistakes." Amanda finally looked up from her phone long enough to smirk. "It sounds like expensive computer games to me. Why don't you just get a job at Best Buy if you love technology so much?" The room fell silent except for the grandfather clock's relentless ticking. I gathered my papers with trembling hands, each sheet a piece of my shattered confidence. 3 weeks of work, months of planning, years of dreaming, all dismissed in 15 minutes. "We're trying to protect you from disappointment," Dad said as I headed toward the door. $50,000 is a lot of money to risk on something so uncertain. We've worked hard for our financial stability, and we can't jeopardize that for unrealistic expectations. That phrase echoed in my head for weeks afterward. Unrealistic expectations. As if wanting to build something meaningful with my skills was somehow childish or naive. As if every successful tech company hadn't started exactly the same way, with someone believing in an idea when nobody else would. I spent the next month working 80-hour weeks as a freelance programmer, taking any project I could find. Website development for local restaurants, database management for medical offices, small automation projects for law firms. Every dollar went into my startup fund while I ate ramen noodles and canceled my gym membership. The hardest part wasn't the financial sacrifice. It was the loneliness. Every family gathering became an exercise in subtle humiliation. Amanda would ask about my little computer project with theatrical concern. Mom would introduce me to neighbors as still figuring out his career path. Dad would change the subject whenever business came up, as if my work was too embarrassing to acknowledge. But I kept building, late nights in my studio apartment surrounded by empty coffee cups and tangled cables. Line by line, feature by feature, my software took shape. I beta tested with local businesses who couldn't afford enterprise solutions. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Store owners reported saving 15 hours per week on inventory tasks. Restaurant managers eliminated food waste by tracking supplies more accurately. Still, the rejection stung every day. When other entrepreneurs talked about family support, I felt that familiar hollow ache in my chest. When successful founders thanked their parents in interviews, I wondered what that kind of encouragement might have felt like. 3 months after my failed presentation, I was debugging code at midnight when my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, knocked on my door. She looked uncomfortable, wringing her hands like she was carrying bad news. "William, honey, I hope you don't mind me asking, but did your parents mention taking out a large loan recently? I couldn't help but notice some official-looking gentleman at their house yesterday, and your mother seemed quite upset." My blood turned cold. Alone. After refusing to help me with $50,000, they had borrowed money for something else. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. But I managed to thank Mrs. Henderson and close the door calmly. That night, I decided I had to know the truth about what my parents considered worthy of financial risk. If they wouldn't invest in my dreams, what exactly had earned their confidence instead? Mrs. Henderson had always been the neighborhood's unofficial information hub, and her network of knowledge proved invaluable over the following weeks. At 74, she maintained friendships with every family on our street and possessed an almost supernatural ability to piece together fragments of overheard conversations into complete stories. I visited her the next afternoon under the pretense of helping with her computer, something I'd done regularly since high school. Her kitchen smelled like fresh cookies, and she bustled around preparing tea while I fixed her email settings. "Oh, William," she said, settling into her favorite armchair with a concerned expression. "I probably shouldn't gossip, but I'm just so worried about your parents. That loan business sounds quite serious." She explained how she'd observed several official-looking visitors at my parents' house over the past month. Bank representatives, lawyers, and at least one person who'd identified himself as a business consultant. Most tellingly, she'd overheard my mother on a phone call discussing Amanda's venture and mentioning numbers that made her gasp. $600 and something thousand, dear. Can you imagine? I nearly dropped my gardening shears when I heard that figure. Your mother was explaining to someone that it was all for your sister's business opportunity." Amanda's business opportunity. My sister, who had never held a steady job longer than 6 months, who spent her days shopping and posting Instagram photos from expensive restaurants. What kind of business could possibly require that kind of investment? I thanked Mrs. Henderson and spent the next week conducting careful reconnaissance. Amanda's social media revealed a troubling pattern. Photos from luxury car dealerships with captions about "building my empire." Pictures of herself in designer business suits standing next to expensive vehicles. Posts about partnering with industry experts and revolutionizing the luxury automotive experience. The pieces started forming a picture I didn't want to believe. My sister had apparently convinced my parents to finance a high-end car dealership, complete with premium inventory, and upscale facilities. The same parents who'd called my software startup Chuin or Software Soft Stockmere too risky had invested over $600,000 in Amanda's fantasy of becoming a luxury car mogul. My best friend Jake Martinez worked as a financial analyst, and he helped me research the public business records. Sure enough, Amanda had filed incorporation papers for Premier Automotive Solutions 3 months earlier. The registered address was a commercial space in the city's most expensive retail district with monthly rent that exceeded my entire annual budget. But the most shocking discovery came when Jake ran a background check on Amanda's business partner, a smooth-talking man named Derek, who appeared in several of her social media posts. Derek had a history of failed business ventures, questionable financial dealings, and at least 2 bankruptcy filings in other states. He looked like a catalog model and spoke like a motivational speaker, but his track record suggested something far more sinister. William, this guy is a classic con artist, Jake said, showing me the research results on his laptop. He targets wealthy families with business-hungry children, promises quick returns in luxury markets, takes their money, and disappears when things go south. The timeline made sickening sense. Derek had appeared in Amanda's life right around the time I'd made my loan request. While I was being lectured about financial responsibility and realistic expectations, my sister was being courted by a professional manipulator who understood exactly how to exploit my parents' favoritism. I drove past the dealership location one evening and found it completely empty. No cars, no furniture, no signs of any business activity. The space had been abandoned for at least a month, according to the security guard I spoke with. Derek had vanished along with all the inventory money, leaving behind nothing but unpaid bills and broken promises. When I confronted Amanda directly, her response confirmed my worst fears. She shrugged off the failed business like a minor inconvenience, blaming Derek for mismanaging the operational aspects, while taking no responsibility for the disaster. She seemed genuinely confused about why I was upset, as if losing hundreds of thousands of dollars was just part of doing business. These things happen in entrepreneurship, William, she said, with an almost comical lack of self-awareness. At least I tried to build something big. Some people are just too scared to take real risks. The casual cruelty of that statement left me speechless. Here was my sister, who had never risked a penny of her own money, lecturing me about courage, while our parents faced financial ruin because of her reckless partnership with a criminal. But the final twist came when Jake's research revealed the true scope of the disaster. My parents hadn't just taken out a business loan. They had refinanced their house, liquidated their retirement accounts, and pledged their personal assets as collateral. If they couldn't make the payments, they would lose everything they had worked decades to build. The same parents who wouldn't risk $50,000 on my proven concept had bet their entire financial future on Amanda's partnership with a con artist. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that I could barely process the emotional implications. As I drove home that night, my phone rang with the call that would change everything. It was my father, and his voice carried a panic I'd never heard before. "What? William, son, we need to talk. Can you come over tonight? It's about the family's financial situation. We might need your help with something important." 3 months behind on loan payments. Foreclosure proceedings starting within 30 days. My parents were finally ready to acknowledge my existence, but only because they needed me to save them from the consequences of ignoring me. The irony was almost poetic. On the same day my parents called their emergency family meeting, my software company landed its biggest contract yet. Marcus Thompson, my business partner and a former corporate executive, had been courting a major regional retail chain for months. Their $200,000 deal would validate everything I'd been working toward and provide the capital to expand into a real office space. I was standing in the temporary workspace I'd rented, a converted warehouse downtown, when Marcus burst through the door with a bottle of champagne and a signed contract. The space was nothing fancy, just folding tables, secondhand computers, and the 3 freelance programmers who'd believed in my vision enough to work for equity stakes. We did it! William! Marcus shouted, his usually composed demeanor cracking with excitement. They want the full inventory management suite plus custom integration with their existing point-of-sale systems. This is exactly the breakthrough we needed. The celebration felt surreal considering the family crisis brewing at home. While my parents panicked about their financial mistakes, my unrealistic startup was generating more revenue than I'd originally projected. The same software they'd dismissed as computer games was solving real problems for real businesses exactly as I'd predicted. 2 days later, I signed the lease on proper office space in the downtown business district. Nothing extravagant, but professional enough to impress clients and accommodate the team I planned to hire. The space had tall windows, polished concrete floors, and enough room for 20 employees once we reached full capacity. I was moving boxes when my parents showed up unannounced. Dad wore his most expensive suit, the one reserved for important bank meetings. Mom had dressed like she was attending a corporate board presentation. They both looked stunned as they took in the bustling activity around them. "This is quite impressive, son," Dad said, his voice carefully neutral. "I had no idea you'd expanded so quickly." The understatement was breathtaking. 6 months ago, he'd lectured me about the instability of technology businesses. Now he was surveying an operation that employed 8 people and generated steady monthly revenue. The cognitive dissonance was almost visible on his face. Marcus handled the introductions with professional grace, explaining our client-based growth projections and expansion plans. He showed them the software demonstration that had impressed the retail chain, walking through features that eliminated common business problems. My parents nodded politely, but I could see the wheels turning behind their eyes. "William has built something really special here," Marcus concluded. "The demand for this kind of business automation is enormous, and we're positioned to capture a significant market share." After they left, I felt hollow, despite the successful office tour. Their sudden interest in my achievements felt calculated, tainted by whatever crisis had prompted their unexpected visit. When people only value your success after they need something from you, the validation feels poisoned. My girlfriend Sarah noticed the change in my mood immediately when we met for dinner that evening. At 27, she worked as a marketing specialist for a nonprofit organization and possessed an emotional intelligence that consistently amazed me. She could read my mental state from across a room. Something's bothering you about your parents' visit," she said, cutting straight through my attempts at casual conversation. "This should be a celebration day, but you look like someone died." I explained the situation, the timing, and my growing suspicion that their newfound interest in my business wasn't coincidental. Sarah listened without judgment, asking clarifying questions that helped me process the emotional complexity. "It sounds like they're setting up to ask you for money," she said finally. "The office visit, the sudden respect for your work, the careful questions about your revenue. They're building a case for why you can afford to help them." The next evening, Amanda called requesting a family dinner to discuss important matters. Her voice carried an artificial sweetness that immediately set off alarm bells. She'd never voluntarily spent time with me unless she needed something, and she'd certainly never organized family gatherings. During dinner, I watched my parents' careful performance with growing unease. They asked detailed questions about my business operations, my expansion plans, and my financial projections. They praised my entrepreneurial spirit and expressed regret about not understanding my vision earlier. Every compliment felt like a setup for a larger request. Amanda played the supportive sister role with theatrical precision, asking about my employees and my office lease, like she'd suddenly developed an interest in business operations. She mentioned her own temporary setback, with the car dealership describing Derek's disappearance as an unfortunate partnership dissolution rather than criminal fraud. The manipulation was expertly orchestrated but transparent once I recognized the pattern. They were buttering me up, establishing my success, and minimizing the scope of their crisis. The same people who'd refused to risk $50,000 on my proven concept were preparing to ask me to risk much more on their financial rehabilitation. When I got home that night, I found a stack of threatening letters shoved under my door, not addressed to me, but clearly meant for my parents to find. Late payment notices, foreclosure warnings, and collection agency demands. Someone had deliberately delivered these to my apartment, ensuring I'd see the full scope of their financial disaster. The letters revealed the complete picture: $678,000 in loans, personal guarantees on business debt, mortgage payments 4 months overdue, credit cards maxed out covering minimum payments on other obligations. My parents weren't facing a temporary cash flow problem. They were staring at complete financial collapse. But the most disturbing discovery was a handwritten note from Amanda, apparently dropped by accident. It outlined a strategy for convincing William to help that included emotional manipulation tactics, guilt trips about family loyalty, and specific talking points about his obligation to give back. They had planned this entire campaign like a business presentation, complete with roles, scripts, and contingency arguments. My success wasn't something they wanted to celebrate. It was a resource they intended to exploit. As I sat in my apartment reading these documents, my phone buzzed with a text from Dad. "Son, we need to have a serious conversation about family responsibilities. Can we meet tomorrow? There's something important we need to discuss about helping each other during difficult times." The time for subtle manipulation had ended. Tomorrow they would make their direct request for me to sacrifice my success to save them from the consequences of choosing Amanda's dreams over mine. The family gathering the next Sunday felt like walking into a carefully orchestrated ambush. I arrived at my parents' house to find the living room filled with relatives I hadn't seen in months, all wearing expressions of grave concern and determination. Aunt Dorothy, Mom's older sister, had positioned herself prominently on the main sofa. Uncle Frank, Dad's younger brother, stood by the fireplace, looking like he was preparing for battle. Aunt Dorothy launched into her prepared speech before I'd even sat down. At 65, she'd perfected the art of emotional manipulation through decades of family drama and church committee politics. Her voice trembled with practiced sincerity as she painted a picture of family crisis and collective responsibility. "William, sweetheart, we're all here because we love you and your parents so much." She began, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "Family means taking care of each other during difficult times. Your parents have always been there for you, supporting your education, helping you through college, giving you a foundation for success." The revisionist history was staggering. My parents had paid for a state university education, something they'd made clear was an investment in my future earning potential, not charity. Every dollar had come with expectations, lectures, and reminders about their sacrifice. They'd treated my education like a business transaction, not a gift. Uncle Frank took a more aggressive approach, his construction worker's mentality translating family loyalty into demands for immediate action. "A real man steps up when his family needs him," he declared, his voice echoing off the walls. "You're doing well for yourself now, William. It's time to give back to the people who made your success possible." The logical fallacy was breathtaking. The same family that had refused to support my startup was now claiming credit for its success. They'd actively discouraged my entrepreneurial efforts, yet somehow deserved the benefits of my achievements. Amanda sat in the corner, tears streaming down her face, in a performance worthy of professional theater. She dressed in simple clothes and minimal makeup, trying to project vulnerability instead of her usual high-maintenance glamour. When she spoke, her voice cracked with apparent desperation. "I know I made mistakes with the dealership," she whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "But I was trying to build something for our family's future. Derek took advantage of my trust, and now Mom and Dad are suffering because of my poor judgment. I'll be homeless if we can't figure this out." The victim narrative was perfectly crafted to deflect responsibility while maximizing sympathy. According to Amanda's version, she was an innocent entrepreneur who'd been deceived by a sophisticated criminal. The fact that any basic background check would have revealed Derek's history was conveniently omitted from her story. "William, Dad said, his banker's voice carrying unusual emotion. "We've never asked you for anything like this before, but we're facing a situation that could destroy everything we've worked for. If we don't make these loan payments, we'll lose the house, our retirement savings, everything." Mom joined the chorus with her own appeal. "We're not asking you to give us the money, sweetheart. Just help us secure it. Use your business as collateral for a loan that would cover our obligations. You'll get it back once we restructure everything." The financial impossibility of their request revealed how little they understood about business operations. My company's assets consisted primarily of software code client contracts and intellectual property. No bank would accept that as collateral for a $600,000 personal loan. They were asking me to personally guarantee their debt, making me responsible for their financial mistakes. But the most painful part was watching extended family members nod along with these demands like they made perfect sense. People who'd never started a business, never taken financial risks, never built anything from scratch, were lecturing me about family obligations and moral responsibilities. When I tried to explain the practical impossibility of their request, Uncle Frank became openly hostile. "Don't hide behind excuses and technicalities," he snapped. "Either you're willing to help your family or you're not. It's that simple." The pressure became overwhelming as the afternoon wore on. Cousin after cousin shared stories about family members who'd made sacrifices for each other. Aunt Dorothy cited Bible verses about honoring parents and helping those in need. Mom and Dad painted increasingly desperate pictures of their potential homelessness and social humiliation. I excused myself to the bathroom and called Sarah from my car, needing someone rational to help me process the emotional assault I'd just endured. Her perspective provided the clarity I desperately needed. "They're not asking for help," she said firmly. "They're demanding that you sacrifice your future to fix their mistakes." Real family support goes both ways, William. When did any of them support your dreams or take risks for your success? Her family had gathered for dinner that same evening, and the contrast was illuminating. Sarah's mother, Dr. Jennifer Wong, worked as a psychiatrist and understood family dynamics from a professional perspective. When Sarah explained my situation, Dr. Wong offered insights that cut through the emotional manipulation. Healthy families celebrate individual success and maintain appropriate boundaries, she explained. What you're describing sounds like financial abuse disguised as family loyalty. They're using guilt and social pressure to make you responsible for consequences you didn't create. That week, I reached out to college friends who'd faced similar family pressures. Kevin Nash, who'd graduated with an engineering degree, shared his story of refusing to bail out relatives who'd made poor investment decisions. The parallels were striking. Family members who'd dismissed his career choices suddenly expected him to fund their mistakes. "The hardest part is accepting that they see you as a resource, not a person," Kevin said during our phone conversation. "Once you realize that the guilt trips stop working, you start protecting yourself instead of enabling their dysfunction." But the manipulation campaign was just beginning. Throughout the week, I received calls from loan company representatives who'd somehow obtained my contact information. The conversations were carefully professional, but clearly threatening, designed to make me feel responsible for my parents' obligations. "Mr. William," one caller said, "we understand you have a successful business. Perhaps we could discuss payment arrangements that would help your family avoid more serious consequences." The implications were clear: pay up or face escalating pressure. Someone had given these people detailed information about my business operations, my personal contact details, and my family relationships. The betrayal went deeper than financial desperation into active sabotage of my professional life. When I confronted my parents about sharing my information with collection agencies, their response revealed the true depth of their entitlement. They genuinely believed my success obligated me to solve their problems, regardless of how my help might damage my own future. The final straw came when Mrs. Henderson called to tell me that neighbors were asking questions about my family's financial situation. Apparently, my parents had been telling people that I'd abandoned them in their time of need painting themselves as victims of my selfishness and ingratitude. But the most shocking discovery came when I checked my business bank accounts and found attempted withdrawals that had been blocked due to insufficient authorization signatures. Someone had tried to access my company's funds using forged documents, and I had a strong suspicion about who was behind the attempt. Amanda had always been creative with paperwork, and she'd had access to my signature from various family documents over the years. If she was desperate enough to involve collection agencies and spread lies throughout the neighborhood, forgery wasn't beyond her capabilities. That night, I realized I was no longer dealing with family members asking for help. I was facing people who viewed my success as their property and my refusal as theft. The situation had moved beyond emotional manipulation into potential criminal behavior. The time had come to stop being defensive and start protecting myself and my business from people who clearly had no limits on what they'd do to get my money. The private investigator I hired was a former police detective named Ray Sullivan, who specialized in financial crimes and family fraud cases. At 45, he'd seen enough domestic manipulation to immediately understand the dynamics I was facing. His preliminary investigation revealed a pattern of deception that went back months before my parents had ever approached me for help. Your family has been planning this campaign since your business started showing real success, Ray explained during our first meeting. His office was sparse and professional walls lined with certificates and commendations from his law enforcement career. The loan applications, the business partnership with Derek, even the timing of their requests. None of this was spontaneous. The documentation Ray gathered painted a disturbing picture of calculated manipulation. My parents had researched my company's growth trajectory, estimated my potential earnings, and structured their loan agreements with the expectation that I would eventually bail them out. The entire car dealership venture had been designed as a way to justify asking me for money while maintaining the illusion of legitimate business need. Even more shocking was evidence that Derek hadn't randomly targeted Amanda. He'd specifically researched our family's financial situation and identified me as the real source of potential funding. Amanda had been a willing accomplice, not an innocent victim. Together, they'd crafted a scheme to extract money from my parents with full knowledge that I would ultimately be pressured to cover the losses. Laura Chen, the business attorney I consulted, specialized in family financial crimes and identity theft cases. Her analysis of the attempted bank withdrawals confirmed my suspicions about Amanda's forgery attempts. The signature matches were close enough to suggest practice and planning, not spontaneous desperation. Wishtiki. This constitutes multiple felonies, Laura explained, spreading the bank documents across her conference table. Identity theft, attempted fraud, and conspiracy to defraud a financial institution. If you choose to prosecute, the evidence is overwhelming. But the investigation revealed an even more devastating betrayal. Mark Stevens, the forensic accountant Laura recommended, traced the money trail from my parents' loans and discovered that they'd already spent a significant portion on personal luxuries that had nothing to do with Amanda's business venture. They purchased a boat worth $80,000 3 weeks after receiving the loan funds. Mark reported, showing me marina receipts and registration documents. They also bought a vacation property timeshare and took several expensive trips. This wasn't just poor business judgment. This was systematic financial misconduct. The pattern became clear as Mark continued his analysis. My parents had used Amanda's failed business as cover for a massive borrowing spree, spending money on luxury items they'd always wanted but couldn't previously afford. The car dealership had been a convenient excuse to justify the loans, with my eventual financial rescue always planned as their exit strategy. Pastor David Miller, who'd known our family for over a decade, provided perhaps the most damaging evidence of all. During a confidential conversation, he revealed private statements my parents had made about their expectations regarding my success. They told me explicitly that William's business was their retirement plan. Pastor Miller said, his voice heavy with disappointment. They never believed in traditional values about financial responsibility. They just didn't want to risk their own money when they could eventually risk yours instead. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Every lecture about practical investments, every dismissal of my entrepreneurial dreams, every appeal to traditional values had been pure manipulation. They discouraged my startup, not because they thought it would fail, but because they wanted to control when and how my success would benefit them. Meanwhile, Sarah provided emotional support as I processed the full scope of my family's betrayal. Her steady presence kept me grounded, while my worldview crumbled around me. The people I'd spent my life trying to please and impress had been plotting to exploit me from the moment I showed signs of success. Okay? You're not responsible for fixing people who don't want to be fixed, Sarah reminded me during one of our long evening conversations. Your parents made deliberate choices based on entitlement, not desperation. There's a difference between helping family and enabling abuse. I began documenting everything: phone calls, text messages, social media posts, and financial records. The evidence file grew thicker each day as more details emerged about the systematic nature of their deception. This wasn't a family crisis requiring compassion and assistance. This was organized financial fraud requiring legal intervention. The most painful discovery came when I learned that extended family members had been recruited based on false information. Aunt Dorothy and Uncle Frank genuinely believed they were helping save innocent parents from an ungrateful son's selfishness. They had no idea about the luxury purchases, the planned manipulation, or the criminal attempts to access my business accounts. Setting boundaries required formal written communication through Laura's law office. The letters were carefully worded to establish legal protection while offering one final opportunity for honest reconciliation. If my parents wanted to rebuild our relationship, they needed to acknowledge their misconduct and stop the harassment campaign. Their response was swift and revealing. Instead of accepting responsibility or showing remorse, they escalated their attacks on my reputation and business relationships. Phone calls to my clients, social media posts about my alleged cruelty, and increasingly desperate attempts to turn public opinion against me. Amanda's behavior became particularly erratic as the investigation closed in on her forgery attempts. She alternated between tearful apologies and aggressive threats, sometimes within the same conversation. Her desperation suggested she understood the legal consequences of her actions, but couldn't resist one final attempt to manipulate the situation. The breaking point came when Ray discovered that my parents had been researching my personal assets, including my home value and investment accounts. They weren't just hoping for voluntary assistance, they were calculating exactly how much they could extract from me through legal pressure or continued harassment. They've consulted with attorneys about forcing you into financial responsibility, Ray reported. There's no legal basis for their claims, but they're prepared to tie you up in expensive litigation to pressure you into settlement. The investigation had revealed the complete truth. My family saw me as a business asset to be exploited, not a person to be loved and supported. Every relationship, every interaction, every family gathering had been evaluated through the lens of what they could eventually extract from my success. As I prepared for the final confrontation, I realized that justice wouldn't come from their acknowledgement of wrongdoing. It would come from my refusal to enable their dysfunction and my commitment to protecting others from similar manipulation. The evidence was overwhelming. The legal protections were in place, and the time for family diplomacy had ended. They'd made their choice to treat me like an enemy when I wouldn't voluntarily become their victim. Now I had to make mine. The confrontation I'd been dreading finally arrived through my attorney's office. My parents' lawyers had filed papers attempting to establish some form of financial obligation on my part, claiming that my business success created a moral and potentially legal duty to assist with their debt obligations. The legal theory was absurd, but the message was clear: they intended to use litigation as a weapon to force my compliance. Laura Chen scheduled a formal meeting to address their claims directly. The conference room felt like a courtroom, as both sides gathered with their legal representatives. My parents looked smaller than I remembered, stress and desperation aging them visibly over the past few months. Amanda sat beside them, her designer clothes replaced by a conservative business outfit that couldn't hide the fear in her eyes. Let's address the fundamental issue. Laura began, her voice professionally calm, but unmistakably firm. Your clients are attempting to hold my client responsible for debt obligations he did not create, agreements he did not sign, and business decisions he actively advised against. The opposing attorney, clearly uncomfortable with his client's position, attempted to argue that family relationships created special obligations that transcended normal legal boundaries. But Laura was prepared with documentation that systematically demolished every aspect of their argument. Furthermore, she continued producing bank records and communication logs. We have evidence of systematic fraud, identity theft, and attempted manipulation of financial institutions using forged documentation. The room's atmosphere changed instantly as Laura presented the evidence of Amanda's forgery attempts. The bank security footage, the signature analysis, and the paper trail of her access to my personal information created an overwhelming case for criminal prosecution. But the most devastating moment came when Laura revealed the complete financial analysis Mark Stevens had prepared. The luxury boat purchase, the vacation property, the expensive trips. Every dollar traced from the original loan to personal indulgences that had nothing to do with business investments or family emergencies. Your clients borrowed $678,000 under false pretenses, Laura stated, her voice cutting through the conference room's silence. They used their daughter's failed business venture as cover for personal luxury spending, with full intention of eventually forcing their son to cover the resulting debt. My father's face went ashen as the evidence mounted. The careful facade of responsible parents facing unexpected hardship crumbled under the weight of documented financial misconduct. Mom stared at her hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes, as her role in the deception became undeniable. Amanda's reaction was pure panic. She interrupted repeatedly, trying to explain away the evidence with increasingly desperate stories about misunderstandings and honest mistakes. But Laura had anticipated every possible defense, countering each excuse with additional documentation that proved deliberate intent. The forgery attempts alone constitute multiple felonies, Laura concluded. Identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy charges are warranted based solely on the bank evidence. The opposing attorney requested a recess to consult with his clients privately. Through the conference room's glass walls, I could see animated discussion that quickly devolved into finger-pointing and apparent accusations. The unity my family had presented during their manipulation campaign dissolved under legal pressure. When negotiations resumed, their position had shifted dramatically. Instead of demanding my financial assistance, they were now requesting mercy regarding criminal prosecution. The same people who'd spent months trying to destroy my reputation and steal my business assets were begging for compassion and forgiveness. But their appeals for family loyalty rang hollow after months of manipulation and betrayal. They'd chosen to treat me like an enemy when I refused to voluntarily become their victim. Now they wanted to invoke family bonds that they'd systematically violated through their criminal behavior. The breakthrough came when Pastor Miller arrived unexpectedly with additional evidence I hadn't anticipated. Apparently, my parents had made statements to other church members about their plans to exploit my success. Several witnesses were willing to testify about conversations where they'd explicitly described me as their retirement insurance policy. They told multiple people that William owed them financial support because of their investment in his education. Pastor Miller explained his disappointment evident. They characterized his business success as their property, not his achievement. The final revelation destroyed any possibility of reconciliation. Ray Sullivan presented evidence that my parents had been actively sabotaging my professional relationships while publicly claiming I'd abandoned them. They'd contacted my clients with stories about my alleged financial irresponsibility, hoping to damage my business reputation and force me into compliance. Amanda's desperation reached a breaking point when she realized the full legal consequences of her actions. She attempted to flee the conference room, but building security prevented her departure. In the hallway, she made a final attempt to steal documents from Laura's briefcase, an act captured by security cameras and witnessed by multiple attorneys. The attempted theft was the last straw for their legal representation. The opposing attorney formally withdrew from the case, explaining that he couldn't ethically represent clients who were actively committing crimes during legal proceedings. When we reconvened for final statements, my parents sat alone without legal counsel, their unified front completely shattered. Dad's banker facade had cracked, revealing a desperate man who'd gambled his family's future on manipulation and lost. Mom sobbed quietly, finally understanding that their scheme had destroyed relationships that could never be repaired. I delivered a statement that I'd been preparing for months, every word carefully chosen to express the pain and betrayal they'd caused through their systematic deception. You had a choice 6 months ago when I asked for your support. I began, my voice steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. You could have believed in my dreams, invested in my potential, or simply respected my ambition. Instead, you chose to dismiss my ideas while secretly planning to exploit my eventual success. The words hung in the air like an indictment. Every appeal to family values, every guilt trip about moral obligations, every attempt to claim credit for achievements they'd actively discouraged. You taught me that family loyalty means taking care of each other, I continued. But you defined that loyalty as a one-way street where I owed you everything and you owed me nothing. That's not family. That's exploitation. The room fell silent except for Mom's continued crying. They had no defense against the truth, no argument that could justify months of manipulation, fraud, and betrayal. Their scheme had collapsed under the weight of evidence and their own moral bankruptcy. As security escorted Amanda away for questioning about the attempted document theft, my parents made one final desperate appeal for mercy. But the time for family diplomacy had passed. They'd chosen warfare over reconciliation, and now they would face the consequences of that choice. The legal proceedings would continue, but the emotional resolution was complete. I'd finally seen my family's true priorities, and they had nothing to do with love support or genuine care for my well-being. Justice would be served through courts and consequences, but my real victory was the freedom to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than exploitation and manipulation. 6 months later, I stood in my expanded office space, watching my 50 employees collaborate on projects that would have seemed impossible during those dark nights of family crisis. The legal resolution had been swift once the evidence became public. Amanda faced multiple fraud charges and entered a plea agreement that included restitution and supervised probation. My parents lost their house, but avoided jail time through a financial counseling program that required them to acknowledge their misconduct publicly. The justice felt measured and appropriate, consequences without vindictiveness, accountability without cruelty. They'd learned that actions have results, and exploitation destroys relationships that manipulation can never repair. My business had grown beyond my wildest projections. The $200,000 contract that had started everything led to referrals worth over $2 million in annual revenue. We'd expanded from inventory management software to comprehensive business automation solutions, helping hundreds of companies streamline operations and reduce costs. Sarah and I celebrated our engagement by purchasing a home together, creating the foundation for relationships based on mutual support and shared dreams. Her family welcomed me with genuine warmth, showing me what healthy family dynamics actually looked like. Dr. Wong helped me process the emotional trauma of discovering that my birth family had viewed me as a resource rather than a person. Healing means building new relationships that reflect your values, she explained during one of our conversations. You can't change how others treated you, but you can control how you allow yourself to be treated moving forward. The most satisfying development was creating a scholarship fund for young entrepreneurs facing family pressure to abandon their dreams. Working with local business incubators and mentorship programs, we identified promising startups whose founders needed both financial support and emotional encouragement to pursue their visions. Marcus and I had grown our partnership into something that felt like genuine brotherhood. Having a business partner who celebrated victories and shared burdens made success meaningful in ways I'd never experienced with my birth family. We'd built something valuable together based on mutual respect and complementary skills. Extended family relationships had evolved in unexpected ways. Aunt Dorothy and Uncle Frank apologized profusely once they learned the truth about my parents' manipulation campaign. Several cousins reached out to rebuild connections that had been damaged by false information and manufactured guilt trips. The family members who truly cared about relationships rather than money proved willing to invest effort in reconciliation. My parents eventually completed their financial counseling program and made tentative attempts to rebuild our relationship. Progress was slow and would require years of consistent changed behavior before trust could be restored. But their acknowledgement of wrongdoing was a beginning, and their commitment to professional help suggested genuine desire for transformation. Amanda's rehabilitation program had been more successful than anyone expected. Facing real consequences for her actions forced her to confront patterns of entitlement and manipulation that had defined her adult life. Her letters from the program showed genuine remorse and understanding of how her choices had damaged people she claimed to love. Pastor Miller often spoke with me about forgiveness and reconciliation, emphasizing that healing didn't require forgetting or ignoring harmful behavior. True forgiveness meant releasing anger while maintaining healthy boundaries, offering grace while protecting yourself from future manipulation. The business community had responded to our story with overwhelming support. Local news coverage of the family financial fraud case had generated unexpected publicity for our company, leading to clients who specifically wanted to work with entrepreneurs who'd overcome personal adversity. My experience became a cautionary tale about family manipulation and a success story about persevering despite obstacles. Speaking at entrepreneur conferences about family dynamics and business success became a regular part of my schedule. The audiences always included young founders struggling with similar pressures, and sharing my experience helped them navigate complex relationships while protecting their professional dreams. Success doesn't obligate you to enable other people's poor decisions, I would tell these audiences. Real family support means encouraging each other's growth, not exploiting each other's achievements. The most meaningful moment came when I hired Kevin Nash, my college friend, who'd faced similar family pressures as our director of business development. His experience with family financial manipulation made him particularly effective at counseling other entrepreneurs dealing with relationship challenges while building professional success. Our office culture emphasized healthy boundaries, mutual support, and collective achievement. Employees felt comfortable discussing family pressures without fear of judgment, and we provided resources for counseling and financial planning to help them navigate complex personal situations. Late one evening, as I reviewed financial projections showing continued company growth, I reflected on how different my life had become since that devastating family dinner 6 months earlier. The pain of discovering my family's true priorities had been overwhelmed by the joy of building genuine relationships based on mutual respect and shared values. Sarah joined me in the office, bringing coffee and her infectious enthusiasm for our upcoming marketing campaign. We'd learned to balance professional ambition with personal happiness supporting each other's dreams without losing individual identity. Hey, Rauk, remember when you thought $50,000 was a huge risk? She teased, reviewing our expansion budget for the following year. Now you're investing 10 times that amount in new product development. The irony wasn't lost on me. My parents had been right about one thing: entrepreneurship involved significant financial risks, but they'd been catastrophically wrong about everything else. The biggest risk wasn't losing money on a failed venture. The biggest risk was allowing other people's fear and manipulation to prevent you from pursuing meaningful achievements. As we prepared to leave the office, I noticed a young entrepreneur working late in the co-working space, downstairs. She looked frustrated and overwhelmed, probably facing the same challenges I'd experienced during my early startup days. Tomorrow I'd introduce myself and offer whatever guidance might be helpful. Building something meaningful required more than individual success. It required creating environments where other people could pursue their dreams without the obstacles I'd faced, breaking cycles of manipulation, and enabling networks of mutual support. My phone buzzed with a text from a potential client interested in our automation software, another business owner who'd heard about our company through word-of-mouth recommendations and wanted to explore how technology could solve persistent operational problems. The same software my parents had dismissed as unrealistic computer games was now helping thousands of businesses operate more efficiently. The same dreams they'd called impractical were generating jobs, solving problems, and creating value for entire communities. Success had taught me that the most important family relationships aren't always biological. They're the connections you build with people who celebrate your achievements, support your struggles, and invest in your growth without expecting exploitation in return. Have you ever experienced family members who only showed interest in your success when they needed something from you? How did you handle the pressure to sacrifice your dreams for other people's financial mistakes? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if it resonated with your own experiences. I hope this story encourages anyone facing similar family manipulation to protect their boundaries and pursue their goals, regardless of outside pressure. Remember that true family support means believing in each other's potential, not exploiting each other's achievements. Thanks for listening, and I wish you the courage to build relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming family challenges and achieving success on your own terms. Share this video with anyone who might need encouragement to stand up for their dreams despite family pressure. Your success belongs to you, and you deserve relationships that celebrate rather than exploit your achievements.